opening lines by seizing central territory, instantly preparing for a pawn storm and threatening to dominate the chessboard's core. Establishing immediate central counterplay, this Sicilian defense aims to challenge White's pawn and create an asymmetrical pawn structure, promising dynamic, unbalanced play. Immediately claiming central space and preparing development, this aggressive approach often leads to sharp Sicilian battles. Opening up the bishop's diagonal creates immediate counterplay and challenges White's central ambitions. Developing the knight via the third rank delays its fight for the center and offers Black ample space to consolidate their Sicilian setup. Developing the knight here aims to challenge White's central control and prepare for further pawn advances, potentially eyeing d4. Cracking open the center is the immediate aim, inviting a confrontation that will dictate future pawn structures and piece activity. Opening the center, Black immediately forces the pawn structure to solidify, creating immediate attacking possibilities on the d-file. Reclaiming the center with the knight immediately puts pressure on Black's pawn structure and opens lines for White's pieces. A strategic sidestep preparing a fianchetto, this move intends to bolster the queenside and potentially challenge central space later. Developing the bishop to e3 prepares for kingside castling and solidifies central influence, eyeing potential piece activity along the e-file and the d5 square. Unleashing the fianchettoed bishop on its long diagonal adds immediate pressure to White's center and prepares for potential pawn advances on the kingside. Anchoring a bishop to the kingside dark squares solidifies control and prepares castling, a common theme in this Sicilian-Dragon variation, though it potentially concedes some central dynamism by not developing the queen's knight first. Developing the knight to its natural square on f6, a classic Sicilian maneuver, now prepares for kingside castling and aims to challenge White's central control. A prudent maneuver securing the monarch and preparing for potential central skirmishes, the king's safety is now paramount. Safeguarding the monarch completes a crucial step, solidifying the king's position behind a pawn shield and preparing for potential middle-game skirmishes. Securing the monarch from any unforeseen diagonals after castling is a prudent prophylactic measure, preventing potential discovered attacks down the h-file and creating an escape square for the king should the queenside become chaotic. Developing the bishop to d7 reinforces the central dark squares and prepares for a potential rc8 or rb8 maneuver, aiming to activate the queenside pawns and contest the open c-file that will likely arise. Unleashing the kingside pawn storm begins, aiming to fracture Black's solid defensive structure and create attacking avenues around their castled monarch. Asserting influence over the open c-file now, a crucial artery for future operations and a potential invasion route, prepares for a dynamic middle game by activating a previously passive piece and challenging White's central pawn structure. Shifting the knight to b3 cleverly eyes the queenside, preparing for a potential expansion with b4 or offering a retreat if Black's central pawn break becomes too menacing. Securing the queenside expansion while preventing knight incursions. Initiating a queenside expansion, White seeks to unravel Black's compact structure, aiming to create weaknesses and potentially gain a foothold on the open file, while simultaneously discouraging any premature kingside advances by Black. Challenging the knight's advanced position, N5 aims to disrupt White's central pawn structure and pressure the queenside, potentially forcing concessions or creating tactical opportunities along the now-opened queenside files. Unleashing a pawn thrust, White seeks to ignite the kingside and disrupt Black's harmonious development, creating immediate tension on the e-file and opening lines for potential future attacks against the uncastled Black king. Unleashing the knight on its queenside adventure, the Black player seeks to reposition this piece from the cramped e8 square to potentially a more active outpost, perhaps aiming for c7 or even a daring jump to b4 to harass the White queen. This maneuver also opens up the diagonal for the f8 bishop, a subtle benefit that might come into play later in the middle game. The sacrifice of space around the king, while seemingly risky given White's pawn thrust, could be a calculated gamble to generate counterplay elsewhere. Opening up the A file, white seizes an opportunity to potentially exploit black's slightly passive setup by exchanging a knight that was looking to support a central advance for one that had ventured to the edge of the board, thereby initiating a complex positional struggle where precise piece placement and the management of open lines will be paramount. The queen's occupation of the open diagonal immediately challenges the pawn structure and seeks active counterplay, aiming to disrupt white's centralized knight and potentially create weaknesses on the queen side. Striking at the heart of black's queen side, this knight boldly occupies a central outpost, disrupting the nascent queenside coordination and probing for weaknesses. Repositioning the rook to this square initiates a fascinating strategic dance, subtly contesting the open c-file and preparing to potentially reinforce the queenside with a timely b5 push. This maneuver also offers the rook more breathing room, shielding it from the pressure that might otherwise develop along the d-file, and hinting at a desire to connect the major pieces more harmoniously as the game progresses. Opening a diagonal toward the castled king with the knight's sacrifice immediately throws black's queenside coordination into disarray and forces a reaction, potentially leading to a rapid pawn advance or a structural weakness. Securing the king's immediate safety from the discovered check on the e-file is paramount, preventing a potential cascade of forced exchanges or worse, an outright attack on the monarch. Sacrificing the knight here fundamentally alters the positional landscape, opening up the king's pawn shield for a potential assault, while simultaneously simplifying the material balance. The bishop reclaims its post, a necessary repositioning to defend against the immediate pressure on the now exposed queen side. Unlocking the c-file after black's queen retreated, white decisively seizes the opportunity to breach the pawn structure, aiming to dismantle black's queenside defenses. Reclaiming that central square after the exchange, knight to f6 reestablishes a solid defensive posture, though the pawn on d6 remains a potential target and could necessitate further maneuvering to bolster its protection. A timely repositioning of the bishop to attack the queen and gain control of the a2-g8 diagonal. Emerging from the pawn structure's chaos, this knight seizes a promising outpost, disrupting white's bishop battery and initiating a fascinating dance of positional pressure. Focusing on solidifying the queenside presence, this maneuver aims to achieve a robust pawn structure by offering the d-pawn as bait, potentially opening lines for the rook on the c-file. Fortifying the kingside pawn structure, f5 aims to build a defensive wall, preventing further knight incursions and potentially creating attacking chances on the kingside later, though it does commit black's pawn structure and creates potential weaknesses on dark squares. Sacrificing the bishop here decisively simplifies the position and unravels black's carefully constructed pawn structure, opening lines towards the king. Reuniting the king with its pieces, this repositioning seeks to bolster the monarch's safety amidst the arising tactical skirmishes, aiming to re-establish defensive harmony. Saddling black with doubled pawns on the c-file, while simultaneously offering a favorable exchange, and clearing a path for the queen to exert pressure on the queen side is a bold strategic stroke. Your king is suddenly exposed, a tempting target on the 6th rank, an invitation for the queen and rook to begin their menacing descent. Seeking to exploit the exposed black king, white aggressively pushes the b-pawn, intending to open lines and create attacking avenues down the queenside while simultaneously limiting black's maneuvering options and potentially creating a passed pawn.